I'd like to call the Facilities Committee to order. Winoka, would you please call roll?
I will. Chair Beard?
Here.
Vice Chair Huizenga?
Here.
Thank you, Governor Beard. Vice Chair Huizenga?
Here.
Governor Carter?
Here.
Governor Chopra?
Here.
Governor Levine?
He was
Governor-
here.
Governor Link? Here. And Governor Morton.
Here.
Vice Chair Huizenga, you have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item today is the approval of the minutes. We've all had the opportunity to review the minutes. Are there any changes? If not, then we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Number 3 is public notice of intent to amend the State University System Board of Governors Debt Management Guidelines. And Chris, will you take and walk us through that?
Yes, I'd be very glad to do that, Governor Huizenga. As you will recall, the governor sent a letter to our chair, Dean Coulson, back in January, asking that the board consider additional metrics when reviewing individual university debt proposals. The committee directed staff in March to work with the universities on amending the university debt guidelines to incorporate those additional metrics, and working with the university staff, various council, CFOs, others who typically work with us on these transactions. We've incorporated this into our guidelines. I'll quickly cover the changes. The first is on, it's section 2.3 in your package. In my page 3 of this item, I think it may be page 15 or 16. The first is there's certain types of debt that may be issued without the Board of Governors approval statutorily, and it's just a clarification to indicate that even those debts still require university boards of trustees to approve those sort of lesser classes of debt. These are for things such as equipment financing and the like, but even those require trustee approval. So that's a clarification. Also, the next page, we're recommending that the process, the board and bond finance review process, be increased from 60 to 90 days. In the governor in his letter asked that we, make sure that we scrutinize these, and we've taken that literally into heart, both the Division of Bond Finance as well as my staff and myself. So it's very important. The 60 days has been very much a challenge for the past since January to make that happen. I really don't think that, I know for this time we were able to get the materials into the packet for the University of Florida housing, but some of the previous deals when we've had more than one deal, it's been very challenging to get all the information into the packet, and I know given how complicated these are, it's not fair to the board members to just drop an entire 8-page bond document on you, the day before the board meeting. So that's why the additional time is required, and I think the universities, by and large, are okay with that because they know well in advance when they're coming to the board for approval. And then the only other change is a few pages over. It is at the end of a long list of information required for submission. It starts with A, and now we have added section S and T. It's my page 7, and these are the actual metrics that are listed in the governor's letter. An analysis must be prepared and submitted, which provides quantitative metrics justifying the need for construction. There also has to be a detailed assessment of private sector alternatives. And then lastly, we have to now include a ROI calculation. So those are the two things that we've added to our process. We're not taking anything away. I would be the first to acknowledge there is always a need to revisit these guidelines. We last updated them in 2010. It seems like just to me yesterday, but this is something, as the credit markets evolve, this is something that will have to happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have to come back again in another year or two and look at other changes. So that's a brief description. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Any questions for Chris or for the Facilities Board? Yes.
I have more of a statement than a
than a question, and Chris knows where I'm going to go. I just want to get on the record that I believe that the state university system should work with Mr. Watkins and the management team to evaluate the cost-benefit or the challenges associated with issuing debt on a systemic basis. When the analysis that I did at my firm indicated there was potentially significant savings that could be achieved as opposed to individual universities issuing bonds. There's the implicit guarantee of the state, there's the implicit guarantee of the system, and there's a lot of money that is being left on the table, in some people's opinion, by not issuing this debt systemically. So I think, as I heard from a couple of other governors, things like group purchasing and other things working closer together, I think we can save the taxpayers money, maybe take less pressure off tuition, et cetera. So I'd like to just continue to keep that on the front burner. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Morton. Any other discussion or questions? If not, then I'd like to entertain a motion to amend the guidelines.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. A review and approval, yes.
Governor Huizenga. Governor Tripp, were you trying to move that motion, or was that Governor Morton?
Governor Morton.
Thank you.
No, that's fine, thank you. 4 is a review and approval of the 2014-2015 State University System Fixed Capital Outlay Legislative Budget Request. Significant challenges still exist in the area of facilities financing. Finding the appropriate funding level for maintenance, replacement of existing space, and new facilities will continue to be a challenge for us. With that in mind, I'm going to ask Chris to explain the process staff went through in developing Attachment 1A, and then would like to take the projects individually for any questions. Chris, would you review the process and then ask if there's any questions?
Sure, I'll be glad to do that. First, to talk about the process in general, what I started with, coming out of our June meeting, I took very much to heart the comments from you and Chairman Beard, as well as the committee, that the list that we put forward to the board not be a wish list, but a list based on need. So we have long had a formula for determining space needs for academic space. It includes, there's 10 space type classes. They range from classrooms, teaching labs, research labs, wet and dry labs, office space, teaching gymnasiums, academic support space, and some other minor categories. And, the amount of space needed ultimately is determined by number of students, but also what degree programs they're enrolled in, because some programs, as you can imagine, physically take more space than others. So an English student will take less space, let's say, than an architectural student, historically. So we have factors for determining space, and so we plugged in the factors and we determined, how much each school needs by formula. Then we looked at their existing inventory space, and that's the starting point. After that, however, the formula, that's still it just says, theoretically, in a perfect world, here's what you would need. We know we don't live in a perfect world. So from that formula, I reduced all that need. I took all the need for classrooms out because, in my opinion, at this moment, with the advent of online education and, more and more utilization of space, though there's some need to modernize and update existing classrooms on a net basis as a system, I don't believe we need more classroom space. We may need it individually for individual departments. And the other thing is classrooms make up a very small percentage of our total system space, somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7% of all space. The bulk of space is office and research for academics. So that came out, that was backed out of the formula. Next, I converted the space need into a dollar figure by taking our latest cost of the different space types, converted it into dollars, and then said, how much should each university receive on a formula basis, on a dollar basis? And frankly, the number was too big. It was some $2 billion. So that's too big. So I kept whittling the number down, until I felt like we had something that I thought was a rock bottom. Here's what we need. So that gave me a starting point. Then I looked at what the university trustees had approved, which is their capital improvement plans, and developed this list, looking at their top priorities, also looking at the board priorities. And the board priorities, and this is color-coded in your package, it's on if you want to start moving towards the project list, continuation projects, utility infrastructure, also known as critical deferred maintenance, renovation of existing space, building and land acquisition, new projects, and then non-surveyed. So in developing this list, new projects, once the list was put together, it was already so large, it seemed apparent that we would not be able to afford any new projects. You know, new meaning they had no previous funding at all from the legislature, or wasn't a renovation, wasn't maintenance. Also, we took off from the list, some trustees recommended for high priority funding a non-survey recommended project. And I, again, in keeping with the guidance provided by this board, those were moved off from immediate funding. So that got this list down to what some would say is still a very large number. It still totals $377 million in the first year of funding. But yet, it's much reduced from what we could say, well, we need by formula, by, following the statutory processes. So that's just sort of a broad overview. I'd be glad to take any questions of that part, or we can just sort of review the list of projects we have before us.
Any questions before Chris moves on to individual projects?
Okay.
You're free to move on.
Okay, so the first project, and these are just in the historic order, facilities seems to be we've just done it in this order for a long way. There's no, one higher than the other. It's University of Florida, the Chemistry, Chemical, Biology Building. This has been funded previously by the legislature to the tune of $22 million. In order to finish this project, University of Florida has requested $29 million in year one, $10 million in 15-16, and then the final equipping in 16-17. This is the highest priority project for the University of Florida. I know UF staff are here and would be glad to speak to the critical need, but this is a real bottleneck issue for UF, and this is why this has become their number one project. Okay, I'll move to next to Florida State. There are two projects on the list, and let me first say this. The column that has the numbers, that is the prioritization of the university, and you'll see, for example, going back to UF, that's technically their number two priority. Number one is for utility maintenance, and I guess I sort of glossed over that because it's just, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. The two items in red, that is the PICO critical deferred maintenance and the PICO renovation, repair, remodeling. That is the number one priority for the system and for each university. And the staff recommendation is 100% of all the PICO funding, which is PICO cash, go into these two lines to $62 million for critical deferred and $34 million for statutory formula repair, remodeling, renovation.
Chris, will we actually have PICO money this year, or will it be funded from general revenue as much of it was last year?
I believe we will have PICO money this year. There will not be bonded money. It's cash. The legislature was very conservative with its PICO allocation last year. In fact, it didn't spend any new PICO dollars. It actually infused over $300 million of general revenue into the program. And then the governor vetoed several projects, I believe just two for the university system, but several for the college system. Those funds, since they were appropriated PICO, stay in the PICO pot. So the cash is real. The backlog of projects, some of the board members who have been here for a few years recall at one point in time, I think it was in 2011, we were looking at cutting up to $250 million of prior appropriations because PICO was in so much trouble. That didn't happen, but now all those old projects are very close to completion, so there's not an old backlog. So long story short, yes, I believe this number is real. it could go down a little. It may go down to 80. It could go up to 100 and something. And PICO can only be used for K through 20 educational construction. So it can't be, there's really no point in saving it or banking it. It cannot, it's by constitution, so it can't be redirected to other parts of the budget. So I think that's a pretty safe number.
Good, thank you.
Okay, then if I may, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move to Florida State. We have two continuation projects recommended. First is a joint use facility, the existing FAMU FSU College of Engineering. This Phase 1 was the original building, built some 20 years ago, I believe. Phase 2 happened shortly after that. This is Phase 3. Phase 3 is some renovation and also some expansion. It is a joint use facility. Both schools agree. That's one of the reasons it's on this list, because it's a high priority of both institutions, and it's a very important program for both. It has received prior funding from the legislature. You see both FSU and FAMU have received the funding. The recommendation is for $4 million for FSU, and I'll mention FAMU, and $13 million for FAMU. Those would be combined into one project because it's one facility, and they just operate it jointly. So that's an existing building. Next for FSU is the Earth, Ocean, Atmospheric Sciences building. This is a very significant science building at Florida State University. It has received the planning money, but has not received, the bulk of the money. It is going to be, the FSU is requesting $30 million for the upcoming year, 26 the following, and then the final equipping in 5. That will be a complete building. The Phase 1 is somewhat misleading. They do plan other phases and other buildings on that same location, but it's not as if we're just building a few floors of a building and then we'll need more funding. For $60 million, you do get one complete, I'm sure very much the state-of-the-art science research facility at Florida State. I'll move on then, unless there are any questions, to USF. We have 3 projects. These are in the order, again, requested by the university. Priorities 1, 2, and 3 were utility infrastructure, and since USF has 3 campuses, that took up the first 3 slots of priority. So in effect, these priorities 4, 5, and 6 are the highest priorities of the institution. We have first the St. Pete College of Business. It received $5 million last year, and they were asking for $22.3 million to complete the facility. The USF Heart Health Institute, that's for their medical campus. They've received a total of $19.3 million last year. That was, I believe, the project that received the largest amount of funding last year for the state university system. They're requesting $14.7 to finish it. Next year, I think that will allow them to go to construction, then $16 million to finish it. Lastly, the Interdisciplinary Science Building, it needs $9 million to finish it out. That's the facility we had the last board meeting in and had some conversations of how that very lovely reception space on the 8th floor, as nice as that is really meant to be lab space. So $9 million will allow that. And I think it's also the 7th and the 8th floor allow them to finish that up and make it the true 100% science building it truly is intended to be. If there are no questions, I'll move to the next, Florida Atlantic. The FAU Scripps project. This is an existing facility. This was constructed by agreement with Palm Beach County. Like I said, it's an existing facility. It was very innovative. The county built it with the understanding that the university would pay them $2 million a year, and then in turn they would actually acquire ownership of the facility. FAU has been making these payments. The $4 million is the last remaining payments on this existing facility at Jupiter. And then we come to the first renovation project, College of Science and Engineering Buildings 36, 45, and 55 at $10 million. FAU has not received a new project in several funding cycles, and this is their top priority for funding, to not build a new building, but take 3 existing buildings and do significant renovation. So I completely support that. West Florida, We are recommending as a top priority the College of Arts and Sciences Building 58 renovation at $11 million. I'll provide some explanation there. The university requested some other projects as a higher priority, but they are not yet fully survey recommended, so I believe we'll be discussing this later. For that project as well as some others, I believe the chair's intention is that we workshop these items so we can better understand, the strategic value and import of these facilities, because they are new. Phase 1 of the building is survey recommended, but in total right now it's a project of some $40 to $50 million. I've been talking to university staff. I believe that the scope of the project will be brought down in keeping with the, where we see the budget realities are, if that's a fair way of saying it, President Benz. So that's West Florida. Next up, and stop me anytime, UCF, we have 2 renovation projects, the Engineering Building 1 renovation, Math and Physics Building renovation, that have received previous funding. I'll take them both at the same time because they're very much of the same era facilities, 1960 era, original buildings at UCF. Clearly, if all UCF had received, would receive was these $3 million, they could do some minor repairs. The buildings really need major renovation. They were on our list of projects for critical deferred maintenance, and it just was not sufficient. These buildings really, $4 or $5 million just for the size of these buildings is not enough to replace the roof, replace all the mechanical systems, and these are science buildings. And that's really the appropriate amount of funding there. Next for UCF is the library renovation. It says Phase 2. I don't know when Phase 1 was. It was that long ago. But this is the main library at UCF. It's used very intensively. As we all know, they're not to store books anymore. They, in effect, are study spaces. That's where the students congregate. That's where they meet. These are more now than ever so critical to the universities. Many of them run, if not 24/7, virtually 24/7. You'll also see this on the CITF list. The students recommend this as well. If recommended by this board, if both lists are recommended by the board, thank you.
That's why I'm here.
You'll be missed on many fronts.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. So anyway, the school wants this very badly. They made it a top PICO priority. The students have made it a top CITF priority. At the end of the day, if both lists are approved by this board, and the legislature will sort this out. In other words, the legislature will not provide $33 million in state money to renovate the library, plus $33 million in CITF to renovate the library. That will be worked out by the legislature. This is just really an indication from the school of how much this project is needed there. We'll then move to
Governor Fossey has a question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Izenga. The UCF CITF list has library phase 1, and it has a different allocation amount. Is there a difference between phase 1 and phase 2 for the UCF library?
Well, I may be mistaken there. Is there somebody, President Hitt, is there somebody from UCF that could speak to that, or do you want me to get back to the...
We need to get back to Bill Merkel on how the phasing goes, but there are related projects. One is to build a new component of the library, essentially a cube that will house a robot that will handle storage of less used materials, and by resorting to that, we're saving about $60 million in the total project of bringing the library back up to code. But I'm not sure how they've broken the CITF and eco portions of these. And I don't think Bill Merck is here today.
Yeah.
Tony, do you know? Do you or Dan know how the money was broken on the library project between, I think we're looking at between CITF and PICO.
And our system architect, Ken Ogletree here, we'll group up after the committee meeting. We'll see if we can answer before we, go to the full board meeting this afternoon.
Have the answer.
Yeah, we'll have the answer on that.
Chris?
FIU, the Student Academic Support Center is actually under construction. It's been funded to the tune of $21.8 million, and the last remaining $1.6 million is for equipping of the facility, so that would just complete, that's a completion project. Satellite chiller plant expansion, that is an expansion of their chiller loop. It's an existing facility. It has, I believe, 2 modules already installed. This would provide an additional 3 modules of chiller capacity. The primary reason is FIU, with the facilities it's added recently over the years, is really taxing its existing chiller and satellite chiller, and this would prevent any type of, catastrophic breakdown of FIU's chiller plant, chilling capacity. And then $20 million for renovation and remodeling of a whole variety of spaces at FIU. For North Florida, this is the one building acquisition on the list at $18 million. The school actually requested $6 million a year over 3 years, but the property they wish to acquire is really valued at $18 million. So I put it all there all at once because they won't be able to acquire it without the full amount. Land acquisition is rare, but it does happen in the system. For UNF in particular, this is a very strategic or tactical move on their part, and that what they've done is they've used to have a research park adjacent to the university. Well, what was in the research park was really business buildings, the most prominent being the former headquarters of AOL. And when AOL fell into difficulty several years ago, UNF had the great opportunity to purchase that facility, which they did. The legislature appropriated the funding. They picked it up for pennies on the dollar. Now that is their administrative hub for all their back office support space. There was one other business that they required, was a former construction firm that also fell into financial difficulties. There's one more business. It's doing very well, but UNF, in the long run, when the lease runs out on that facility, would like to acquire that, because that's really the only place UNF has to go. The whole area surrounding UNF is just booming right now. It's just a hotbed of economic development, and the university is not going to be able to afford in the future, I believe, to ever expand. So this is a very tactical and strategic acquisition for UNF.
So Chris, would if they acquired the property now, if they were allocated the dollars, would the tenant stay in the building and finish out their term, or?
Yes, that's the intention, that they would stay there, and the term runs through, I believe, 2018, 2019, 2021?
2019.
Okay. So it would run for, say, some 7 years. But this is 14, 15 money, and typically these land acquisitions do take quite some time to negotiate. Next, Florida Gulf Coast. $9 million for their central energy plant expansion. Florida Gulf Coast, as we all know, has grown tremendously since, I think it's been in existence now 15 years, and they've added a tremendous array of facilities. Really, before they can move forward at all to their build-out, they need to add some more energy plant capacity. That's what this facility does for them. So that's just the prudent thing to do for them. New College, we're here today. The Hamilton Student Support Center, plaza renovation, remodel. I can say the Hamilton Center is something.
I have a question.
I think we have a question.
I note if I go a couple of pages on FGCU, there's that continuation project, and I note, excuse me, that's the only continuation project on these last 2 pages, and I believe that Innovation Hub was already funded partially. Is there a reason why it's on that schedule and not on this schedule?
Yes, there there is a reason for that. Everything you stated is correct, Governor Morton. The reason being is that was previously funded, but that project, the completion funding for that project was vetoed last session. So I think the thought is it's very important that the university be allowed to make the case as to the critical nature, the strategic importance of that project to the institution to hopefully help not only persuade the legislature once again to fund the project, but to hopefully avoid a veto again of the same project.
How much money was, I noted there's no number in the column as respects previous funding, whereas all of the other projects have previous funding. How much money was already given or was appropriated and transferred to Florida Gulf Coast for that facility?
$4.5 million is the number I have.
So they have already received $4.5 million, which I don't see on the schedule.
And that was something we can correct going forward.
And they're asking for 7.6, or they need 7.6 to finish the project.
That's
And the
correct.
reason why it's not on the list with all the other projects that have been previously funded is because the governor vetoed it?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to understand it.
If I may, I'll move to, we were talking about New College. The $1.6 million is more than New College statutorily would, not statutorily, by formula receive. New College does stand out because of its small enrollment size. The formula generates very, very little need for New College. The amount that they actually need for the renovations is $1.6 million. So what I did was recommend, I collapsed all their funding for the next several years into one project and put it in year one, which is why you see nothing for New College for the following 2 years. Next, Florida Poly. Florida Poly Board has not yet adopted a capital outlay budget request for fixed cap outlay. Staff has communicated that their intent is to adopt a budget no later than December 1st, and should they do so, I'll make sure that the committee is made aware of any needs from Florida Polytechnic University. The current building number 1 is on schedule. It's on budget. It is slated to be open next fall. So I don't think there's any question about building number 1. I just thought important to state that for the record. Lastly, in terms of the 5-year list, is a joint use library storage facility. It received several years ago $2 million in planning, and University of Florida, which is the lead agency on this, has been doing a lot of planning and a lot of collections. Tim is going to talk about this in the operating budget section when we get to the next committee. The idea is really, I think, a very fundamentally sound one. Each of our 11 universities with libraries have collections and have duplicate materials in their collections. And by having one central repository, they'll be able to, eliminate volumes that are unneeded. They're going to digitize the volumes, but yet retain at least 2 copies, hard copies, for the ages, and put them in a dense warehouse facility, located outside of Gainesville. It's modularized, so it can be added to in the future. This is something that the provost support wholeheartedly. They have a very good plan to operate the facility once it's constructed as a joint system, and it will free up space on the main campus of each institution as they can transfer books. It will also, many books right now are in storage facilities that are really not designed for long-term storage of books or other media-type materials. This will be a climate-controlled facility. And so that's a system priority.
Excuse me, Chris, are all the universities I know are aware of it, but are we vetting their new libraries and whatnot? And as President Hitt was talking about, large computerized system and whatnot, do we have any kind of guidance that we're giving them about how many copies of books they should keep on hand, or by age or anything? Has anything like that been looked at, or?
I don't know the answer to that. I have been communicating with the head librarian at the University of Florida, who has the project lead on this, and I'll see if I get an answer to that question for you. My guess is the librarians are talking to each other. I know Nancy McKee, who I don't believe is here today, has been working with the librarians on several initiatives, and that is one of them, in addition to the online university. And I'll touch base with her, and as well as Dr. Russell from UF.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Now that we've discussed attachment 1A, my suggestion is that we approve the list as is, but ask the schools with continuation projects with less than 25% funding to present as well at an upcoming workshop. Also, I'd like staff to prioritize funding for these projects for the next meeting as well. Does anyone wish to propose any other changes or amendments to the list? Do I have a motion to approve attachment 1A, including these amendments then?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. With regards to attachment 1B, my intent is that all universities be given the opportunity to more fully explain the strategic importance of each proposed new facility. This will take place at a workshop which will be scheduled prior to the January meeting of the Facilities Committee. I'm asking the staff to work with the universities on addressing a list of questions which is being developed. These will include how the new buildings will improve key metrics, create jobs, and serve the statewide interest. The committee will then consider for inclusion those projects coming out of the new project workshop. Attachment 2 does not require board approval. This is provided for informational purposes, so we can move on unless there are any questions. No questions? Next, we come to the Capital Improvement Fee Trust Fund projects found on Attachment 3. I'd like Chris to explain how the list was developed, and then we need to have a discussion as to how we would like to proceed with this item. First, I'd like the committee to consider approval of the complete A and B totaling roughly $151 million.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to briefly just explain the process?
Be great, thank you.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. The process is the one we followed, very similar to last year. We calculate how much cash is available to start with, which was basically $2 million, because the bulk of the cash was appropriated by the legislature last year, the $70 million that the board requested. So in effect, my estimate was a little off. But I was off the right direction. We were over, and we were up $2 million. So we start with $2 million cash. I then look at projections for the current year based on the work plan enrollment projections for 14-15 of the universities, convert it into the credit hour rate. I know the rate because the fees are set. The board considered the fee increases and said no to the fee increases. So the fees are set. So it's really just a matter of taking the per credit hour charge times the projected enrollment. That gives me gross revenues. I deduct annual debt service, which is known. I deduct University Child Care Center payments, which are also known, to arrive at a cash number. The cash number was $31 million. Each school historically receives a proportionate share. It's based on 1 year of actual collection, so based on the last fiscal year, 12-13, what the universities actually submitted to Department of Education, as well as one projected year for the 13-14 year, for what's projected. And that's basically our cash number. So that is what I would say within a margin of error, and I just admitted I had a $2 million margin of error, but I try to be very conservative on these projections. That is a very reliable number. The bond number I took last year, we had capacity of $130 million. I've scaled that back to $120 because some of the fee increases I had anticipated did not materialize. That $120 number gives us a coverage of roughly 1.5 coverage. So 1.5 cover, meaning we'd have revenue sufficient to meet the debt service if it was authorized, ultimately, plus 50% more. Historically, the bond covenants require 1.2 cover. Historically, the programs run between a 130 and a 140 cover. Right now, we're over 2 because last year we had capacity, and of course the decision was made by the legislature not to use that debt capacity. So we have capacity, 120, I think, is a minimal number. The difference from a practical standpoint between A and B, A has no bonding. A provides an allocation to each school, but doesn't complete any of those projects. A plus B completes all the projects with the exception of FAMU, which still, I've talked to university officials, they still need to work on the project. The students want a new student union, but even with the money received last year, and even with bonding, FAMU by formula does not get anywhere close to $33 million. That's A plus B plus C equals the complete project, and I've indicated, what other sources the university has to complete the project. Some of them are using funding from last year. Some of the students have other resources. So A plus B does provide a complete project, with the one exception noted of FAMU, and I'm sure if, moving forward, that project will either be scoped out or a different project will be selected to fit within the budget that's potentially available. So each university went through the statutorily required process of having a committee, 50% appointed by the student body president, 50% appointed by the university president, to come up with these recommended project lists. So that's been complied with. It's been vetted and blessed by each university board of trustees, and that's where the projects came for the universities. The dollar amounts basically came from the application of the allocation formula. So that's the process. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Chairman? Thank you, Chairman. Question about what you said about the FAMU numbers. I didn't understand it.
Okay. Let me see if I can try and get Governor Levine. So FAMU is requesting a $33 million project. If you take A plus B, which is the cash portion plus the bond portion, that totals some, roughly not quite $6 million. They had funding last year, 2.3. That would give them a grand total of $8.6 million to fund a $33 million project. So that doesn't get them there. So that's what I'm trying to say. FAMU would have to look at likely picking a different project or scoping the project down. I don't think they've determined that yet. They don't have the ability, I believe, to borrow the remaining balance on some type of debt basis for the facility.
Okay.
And none of the other universities are planning to do that, by the way. If there's a delta difference, it's cash they either already have or would obtain from their student government.
So the difference would have to either come from an increased fee to support the debt service or a GR appropriation, a cash appropriation.
It would have to come from either increase of fees. A GR appropriation is certainly possible, but it could not come from PICO because this is not an educational facility. This is a student use facility, and PICO can't be used. So I would think a GR appropriation would be highly unlikely for the facility.
Okay, that helps.
Any other questions? Then I'd like to say that we're going to ask for approval by the committee, and we'll vote. The vote will be for the A plus B, which is basically the cash portion, and an approval of bonding the cash going forward to achieve the roughly $151 million that's requested. Is that correct, Chris?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
And I think that as we vote, one thing to keep in mind is that this will still go to the legislature and to the governor's office for approval, and there may be additional vetting that they do as they review this list. Okay? Winoka, will you call the roll?
Motion.
I'm sorry.
I move.
Well, second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you.
Okay, so Governor Carter,
Yes.
Governor Chopra,
Yes.
Governor Levine,
Yes.
Governor Link,
Yes.
Governor Morton,
Yes, with a statement, I think, as we continue to move into this challenged future of resource challenges, if you will, that it's incumbent as we go through these processes in future years to look at duplication within the system and just how many universities should have a program that is related to or duplicative of another program that taxpayers have funded somewhere else in the state. Not saying it shouldn't be done, but I think we need to look at this continuously to make sure that we have as efficiently and effectively used the taxpayers' dollars. Thank you.
Chair Beard
Yes.
and Vice Chair Huizenga.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Norco. The last item, item 4, the state Cortellis matching program is also included as information only. So unless there's further discussion, that concludes this item, and we can move to the consideration of the UF housing item. Any discussion? Chris, would you please tell us about the next item?
Sure. This is a request from the Board of Governors for the Division of Bond Finance to issue housing bonds on behalf of the University of Florida to finance a student housing facility. It will consist of some estimated 255 beds. The cost is not to exceed $25 million. University of Florida has performed all the requisite metrics required by the governor's letter, and of course they were looking to incorporate into the debt guidelines. It has a study from Brailsford and Dunleavy. UF has a significant waiting list, as we can imagine, very similar to the FSU dorm deal that this committee approved at the last 2 meetings ago. It's because of the nature of the university. They have not added new housing in many, many years. One of the unique features of this housing is that they're adding approximately 30 rooms to serve the severely disabled. They'll be exceptionally ADA compliant. University officials are very enthusiastic about this project. David Kratzer, VP for Student Affairs, is here from the university, as well as his team, to address any questions at all about the project. I will also say, as I've said in the past, this information has been communicated with the appropriate cabinet-level officials at the governor's office. As of yesterday, they've indicated they don't see any problems with this deal, and we've been trying to work very closely with both Division of Bond Finance and the governor's office, particularly on deals like this that ultimately have to go forward for governor and cabinet approval. And that would be the next step. If approved by the committee and the board today, it would next go to governor and cabinet. Once approved by governor and cabinet, UF is ready to go towards construction. And I'd be glad to take any questions. And as I said, university officials are here to speak towards the project.
Vice Chair Hosseini has a question.
Chris, how close is the building, or maybe Mr. President can answer, how close is this building to the core of the university?
To the core of the university. It is right in the middle of the, shall we say, older part of the campus.
Great. And to me, I think that's very important, more and more having the kids closer to the university for safety and security.
And I would also add, Mr. Vice Chair, that this will be immediately adjacent to the Disability Resource Center at the university, which is, I think, also an important feature.
Isn't it in the Yulee area, which is really the heart of the campus, as I recall?
One's heart is determined by one's interests, Governor. Many people find Ben Hill Griffin Stadium to be the heart of the campus. If you're familiar with the campus, Norman Hall's the College of Education, which is right, it's the old high school there, and in the disabilities, there's an underpass under 13th Street, and there's the Disability Center right there, and there's other housing in the area. So literally, these people will be in easy walking distance to all of the main classroom areas of the campus.
I think there would be a great demand for it, because one of my concerns when you read some of these is the commercial market able to produce a product at a price which is more than competitive. But when you look at the location of this facility, it's going to be in, I think, great demand by the students.
And I commend you for focusing on the students with disabilities. I actually was an RA in college in the dorm for disabled students, and having that available to the students that will meet their needs really enhances their experience.
This is in distinction to some of the housing areas in other parts of the country. Instead of a climbing wall, we're building a disability center. I think it really says good things about higher education in Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve it.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just a question here on the last sentence. I'm assuming it was approved by the Board of Trustees on the 3rd September.
Yes, that's correct. It was approved, and I'm sorry I failed to mention that, Dr. Chopra.
Good catch. Good catch, Governor Chopra. Thank you. Anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
So moved.
Is that a no vote? or is that-
Lastly, we have a series of regulation amendments.
It's an early morning,
Chris, could
right?
you please briefly describe the proposed changes?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. First is 9.005, naming of university facilities. We were requested by Chair Coulson to look into this regulation and see if we can better define, what items require board exception approval. In working with the university staff, and we had extensive discussions with many university staff, several conference calls, we actually have eliminated the exception for the Board of Governors. I think the context to keep in mind is that Section 267.062 prohibits the naming of any state building, et cetera, after a living person. Universities are the only entity given an exception, and this board is given specific regulatory power to do so. So I think what's being proposed is that, provide increased clarity given the significance of that. Naming of a university facility is not only an honor, but it can also be very lucrative to the university. It's, and help construct facilities. So what's in the regulation, it aligns our regulation with our site regulation, which is 8.009, and it tightens up the definition for non-gift related naming so that there no longer will be a Board of Governors exception to name it after an existing faculty member or any other member of the system, say a departing chancellor or something like that. He actually has to be all the way gone from the system. So with that, that's...
Frank Brogan Memorial Chiller Plant. I'm humbled.
It's not a long enough title.
I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a statement that I'd like to make. I don't have any problem with any of it, except I would personally like to retain the word character in the regulation. Are there any objections from the committee to retaining the word character as a criteria for naming opportunities?
Mr. Chairman, I strongly support that. I'd like to find out why it was removed in the first place.
A good question. Chris, do you have any
Mr. Chairman,
insight?
in discussion with university staff, there was a sense that perhaps character was somewhat of a subjective qualification. So that's where that came from. Of course, the regulation requires that the universities each have a regulation on naming, and they all do. So perhaps a compromise might be to leave the character in, but the universities, of course, would be left to their own to define character. Of course, we all, the connotation is good character, so.
As opposed to just a character.
I agree.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if you need a motion to that effect to add the word character in there, I would make that motion now.
I'll be happy
Thank you, Governor Carter. We don't.
Do we need
You
it?
don't. It's
We
in
don't.
the
You don't need-
existing regulation, and all this is
Okay.
approval to post as a proposed regulation, so you don't really need a motion to keep language that's currently in the regulation.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Vicki.
you.
Appreciate it. Okay, Chris, would you continue on with the next regulation then, if there's no more discussion on A?
And I'm cognizant of time, so I'll do this very quickly. 140025 is action required prior to we're amending this as a fixed capital outlay budget request. Really what we found here is, this was pointed out by university staff, that this is an old reg that needed some refreshing to update some statutory changes that sort of crept up on us. So the dollar threshold is taken out in one. So instead of saying exceeding $1 million, it now just reads, no new construction or remodeling project shall be requested on the first year of the 3-year PICO eligible list without being recommended in educational plant survey. So the intention with the dollar limit was something else prior. Now I think it's very clear that any major project should be survey recommended to be in the first year or two of the PICO list. The next one, 3, is a clarification. The university president shall have the responsibility for building program review, approval, modification, disapproval. The thought was approval encompasses all of that if you have the power to approve, you also have the power to disapprove or to request changes. So that was a clarification. And lastly, we found one more reference to the old building fee that was statutorily eliminated back in 2012, so we're recommending we get rid of it because that's probably the one and only fee we've actually, technically, it's gone. It's off the books, and so we're getting rid of it in our regulation.
Okay.
So that's 140025. I'll move next to 14023. Last meeting, the board recommended for notice a new bid protest regulation. We previously had a separate bid protest policy for construction. This new regulation, 18002, covers all procurement types. So we considered entirely repealing 14023, but to eliminate confusing, we are now just including a reference that redirects the reader to look at 18002. At some future point, once all the old contracts no longer have references to 14023, we may be able to eliminate this regulation and just refer to 18002. But council's advice is that we just do a redirect and eliminate any possible misinterpretation on a bid protest. And that concludes the recommended revisions. These are all for notice, and if approved by the committee and the board today, they'll be back in November. No, Vicki says.
Can I be recognized?
Please.
Actually, the bid protest is for final approval. It was noticed in June, and there were no comments.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion? Questions? Governor Carter.
I just want to be sure that in the language that, in terms of character, in the language about the exception, that those strike through, Vicki, that was just in language and it's not going to apply? So we don't need to do anything with that? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that's in the current reg, and this is a proposed amendment for us to notice for public comment, so you don't need a motion to take out existing language. When we post it, when we get back to the office, and character will remain in the regulation because it's already there.
Okay, so what are we doing then? Why are we required to post it if we're not changing it?
Well, you are changing other parts of that regulation.
Okay, all right. Okay, good enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank you for the clarification. If there are no objections, then may I have a motion to approve all 3 items?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much, facility staff, for all of your hard work, and we look forward to sitting with the universities and better understanding the new projects that are being proposed. And remember, we are advocates for you, and we just want to be able to take and to present the best case to the legislature and to the governor so that we can continue to improve our incredible university system.
Mr. Chairman, if the committee would like a brief clarification on the library projects at UCF, I can give that now.
Okay, that would be great.
The library, I think, was last modified in the early 80s, so you're dealing with a library that was built then to suit an enrollment of way under 20,000. We're now at 60,000. If we did the standard expansion, the old style, it would cost over $120 million, maybe $130. By going to the robot that I mentioned, we take stacks out of the existing library, compress them greatly. The materials are still very accessible. Within just a few minutes, the computer-based system can get the materials to the circulation desk for our users. That cost about $30 million to put that system in. The remainder, the second project, Phase 2, is expansion of group workspace, study space, the computer-based access points that we see in modern libraries. That costs about $33 million. Then there's the standard 10% furnishings and materials that would be added. It's about a $66 million project, in contrast to a $120 to $130 million if we use the old standard expansion. The robot, I believe, is the CITF project, and the Phase 2 is the study space. But it's really a remarkable economy that's been achieved by not having the money earlier to do the old-style expansion. Something new comes on, and I guess it's unusual in my experience. It's something that's based on a new technology. It really does cost less. But this will probably be better service for less money and much more efficient in use of space. Let me just say that some of the HVAC systems in that building were installed when the building opened in 1968.
Oh, boy.
So if we don't get a lot of money for this, we're going to need a huge supply of duct tape and coat hangers and paper clips.
So noted.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Hitt.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a couple of quick questions? One, what is the timeline for the Florida Polys list on this? Are we going to amend this? Are we going to add those items?
Chris?
Sure. I think the timeline as we see it is we'll have a workshop to talk about the new projects and the noted continuation projects as made in the motion. We'll then have our November meeting where we'll look at the prioritized list of projects so we see better prioritization. My understanding, and perhaps, I want to say Chair Parker, Chief Operating Officer Parker could comment. They've committed that it will be before December, so staff will be able to look at whatever the request may be and consider that at our January meeting.
Thank you. One other question, Mr. Chairman. On the CITF, if there is no bonding ability, what are the projects that are realistically possible?
I think that we will, that's a very good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I would think that we would have to go through and rank which project, look at the values of the projects and figure out what is feasible with the cash that's there and then make a determination of how to move forward. Chris, am I in the ballpark, correct, or not?
I think you're right. That's going to be a very difficult question. I think one of the things we saw at our last meeting with the $70 million cash allocation, some universities were able to move forward with, if it was a minor project or a renovation, they could say do one thing or the other thing, and if they needed several items of repair. I don't think in any case any of the projects can move forward to completion. I know the one exception there somewhat is UF Rights Union, but they have the benefit of a bond issue, a standalone bond issue that this board authorized, and they also have, they had a significant allocation. So the allocation is probably more helpful to UF in some of the minor projects, but that's just, I almost hate to, that's going to be a very tough question to answer, ultimately, for the universities.
Okay. Thank you, Governor Chopra. That concludes my remarks, and I move that we adjourn the meeting of the Facilities Committee.
Great. Thank you, Governor.
Yep.
Izinga.